This is Gabe Cook with Debate Kansas City, and I'm coming to talk to you today about one of my favorite arguments in debate, known as the politics disadvantage. I really got into it in college, and I've been kind of a political junkie ever since. So, what is a politics disadvantage, you may be asking yourself? Well, it's an argument that looks at what's happening politically at the moment and says, if we were to pass the affirmative plan, how would it affect the politics of the moment? Okay, the Congress and the President, they're always working on stuff. Right now, they're working on health care. They have other issues that they're obviously working on, but health care certainly seems like it's been the big one. So, a politics disadvantage that's really popular right now would say, all right, the Congress and the President, they're working on health care. What would happen if suddenly the Congress and the President had to stop working on health care and they had to start working on the affirmative proposal, and they had to pass the affirmative proposal? In passing the affirmative proposal, what would happen? You know, would it cost the President some political capital, as it's known? The Congress, would some people in the Congress be upset that this issue was coming through? And in the end, who is going to be in favor or who is going to be against the affirmative proposal? How might that upset them or make them happy? And then how might that affect the issue of, let's say, health care? So we look at the politics of the moment, and we see how the affirmative plan would change the politics of the moment. Then the politics disadvantage is going to have an impact at the end that says why the affirmative's effect on the current political scene would be a bad thing. So what I'm going to do is give you a little bit clearer picture on how the politics disadvantage works. Then I'm going to give you 3 steps for creating and arguing the politics disadvantage. So an affirmative proposal has to use the federal government, right? The federal government has 3 branches. You've got the legislative branch, you've got the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Now, most affirmative cases, things like social services, will typically involve legislation that the Congress would write and the President would have to pass. So a politics disadvantage will say, all right, let's assume that your plan passes. That means that the Congress and the President had to work together, that they both had to sign off on it, and that process is something that we can examine as the negative team and look at what will the end result be and how it will affect other issues. Okay, so now we have some kind of understanding of the way the politics disadvantage works. I'm going to jump into those 3 steps. What are the 3 steps to writing and winning a politics disadvantage? Well, the first one is you have to find and control uniqueness. What do I mean by that? Find and control uniqueness. Well, it means that you've got to go out there and you've got to do yourself some research. And when you do that research, you need to understand what is at the top of the current agenda. What is it that the Congress and the President are investing their time in? As I've talked about before, right now it's health care. That seems to be the issue that's at the top of the agenda. Alright, so now you know, okay, health care, that's the big issue. What do I do next? Well, then you have to know the key players that are involved. Who is really going to decide whether or not health care is going to pass? Obviously, right now, Barack Obama and some leaders in the Congress, both in the House and in the Senate. Once you figure that out, the way you find and control uniqueness is by deciding if that issue is going to pass or not. That's what it's all about with uniqueness. You have to decide after you do your research, is a health care reform bill going to pass or is a health care reform bill going to fail? What argument can I win? And this is your starting point. You shouldn't try and make up which side you want it to be. If you think that health care is going to fail, then that has to be your uniqueness story. Because the most important part of any politics disadvantage is finding and controlling the uniqueness. If the other team can win that you're wrong about uniqueness, then the link and the impact part of this debate aren't going to matter at all. So you have to do a bunch of research, you have to find that top issue, know the key players, and then decide for yourself, this issue that the Congress and the President are working on that is the basis of my disadvantage, is it going to pass or is it going to fail? Once you figure that up, sets up the rest of the disadvantage. So for the premise of our example here, we're going to use healthcare, and let's say that we do our research and we decide it's going to pass. We'd want some evidence that says the president is really working on it, that he's got the votes lined up, that it's going to be close, and there's a lot of work still to be done, but at the end, health care legislation is going to pass. Unless we get the affirmative plan, and that's where we get into step 2. You have to create the link story. Once you've decided if issue X is going to pass or fail, and we've decided healthcare is going to pass, then we would have to decide, why is it that the affirmative plan would stop healthcare from passing? How are we going to come up with this link story? Well, there's a couple ways we can go about it. One is we can look for an issue-based link. So this year's topic is social service programs as they relate to poverty. That's our issue. What would an issue-based link be? Well, we would need to figure out who would be upset if we passed social services, and why those folks being upset might prevent health care reform from passing. Here's an example. There's a group in the House known as Blue Dog Democrats, and they're said to be on the fence about health care. It's possible, one could argue, that they would be upset by social services, and if Blue Dog Democrats got angry about social services and decided not to vote for health care legislation, then it might make it impossible to pass health care legislation. Okay, so that would be an issue-based link. You would figure out why social services might make some people mad. Or you might figure out that social services are just unpopular, and that if the president was the one who had to make the push to get the affirmative plan passed, it might cost him a lot of political capital in that push. And that's where we get into the other type of link that you can have, which is a process-based link. That term I just threw out there, political capital, has to do with the process. You see, you can find evidence that says for any significant piece of legislation to pass, the president really has to push it hard. And when a president pushes something hard, it costs him political capital. What is political capital? Well, it's a theory that says a president only has so much power that he can exert, or she can exert when we get a female president one of these days. And that if you keep using so much political capital, eventually you'll run out. So the argument would basically be that the affirmative plan will force the president to push social services that's going to drain him of political capital, and he's not going to have enough left in order to make that final last push for health care. So that would be a more process-based link. So you have issue and process, and the two go hand in hand. You want to prove an issue and a process-based link. And a really simple story that you could have on this year's healthcare debate is that social services are unpopular, especially with some of the more conservative Democrats, which is a key group for Barack Obama to control. And if we have to dive into social services, Barack Obama won't be able to control that group anymore on health care because he will have lost all his political capital. Now health care doesn't pass. Now there's a whole bunch of other link types. There's more links than I could define in a 10-minute video, probably in a 2-hour video. And I would encourage you to go to our blog, debatekc.edu blogs, the students link, the virtual debate tub, and check out all the link files that came out from summer camps. There's all kinds of links. There's an opposite theory of political capital that says political capital is not true. Actually, winners win. When a president gets something passed, it makes him more powerful because he's perceived as a winner. So those two link arguments are in direct contradiction to each other. One says every time you pass something it costs you and makes you weaker. The other says no, every time you pass something it shows that you're a winner and makes you stronger. So there's a whole bunch of links to get into, but the key is to figure out the issue and the process and come up with your link story. Now that gets us number 3, the impacts. Make the impacts big, make the impacts fast. Healthcare. If I'm researching healthcare, I'm going to find evidence that says healthcare is absolutely critical to the economy. If we don't have healthcare reform, our economy will collapse. Great big impact. Because I have to be able to trump the affirmative case. They are surely going to have some kind of pretty decent impact. So my impact has to trump their impact. And the other thing is be ready to go deep on the impacts. Some team might say, you know what, I don't want to bait you about that uniqueness or link stuff. I'm going to turn your impact. And you have to have a really deep file in case they want to get into an impact debate instead of a link uniqueness debate. Alright, so I talked about the 3 steps. Find the story. Okay, make sure you're on the right side of uniqueness and that you can control it. Come up with the link and then make your impact big and fast to trump the affirmative. Hope it helps and hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.